Wild West saloons have been portrayed in popular culture as dens of vice and violence. Located throughout the American frontier, Western saloons were part of the landscape, present in small camps and growing towns alike. Saloons in the Wild West served as repositories of information, houses of companionship, and refuge points amid isolation and loneliness. The activities that took place at saloons were emblematic of the American West itself. Just as settlers gambled everything to embark into the unknown, saloon patrons could bet their earnings on a friendly game of faro or poker. Saloons provided a means of survival, even offering a chance at wealth and prosperity on the frontier. The realities of an old Western saloon match up to how you might imagine them. Gathering places for men interested in drinking, gambling, and an overall good time, only with fewer gunfights and a lot more variability. Have you ever wondered about the wild, Wild West and the role of those old-timey saloons in the communities of yesteryears? Well, you're in for a treat today. In this video, we're diving deep into the fascinating history of saloons in Western towns. We'll explore how these iconic watering holes shaped the culture, social life, and even the economy of the frontier. So before you kick back and watch, we want to know, what are your thoughts on the role of saloons in these old Western communities? Leave a comment below. And while you're at it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for more captivating history content. The call for permanence. Back in the day, there weren't fancy saloons like you might see in old Western movies. They didn't start because someone had a grand plan. They came about because people in areas with lots of settlers felt the need to come together. These early saloons weren't anything permanent or fancy. In fact, they were as simple as lean-tos or tents. But these makeshift gathering spots were like big welcoming signs, inviting folks from the neighborhood and travelers to sit down, chat, and take a load off. People even struck business deals in these places, and travelers would stop by to rest or wait for transportation after long journeys. As towns in the Midwest grew and changed, so did the saloons. This was partly because they got more business during important events like gold rushes. For example, in Santa Barbara, California, during a gold rush, the town suddenly had a whopping 30 successful saloons. And over in Livingston, Montana, they had 33 saloons for a population of about 3,000 residents. Saloons were places where people came together, and they evolved right alongside the towns they were in. Certainly, as time passed, saloons transformed into places where you could feel the festive spirit from a distance. Some nights, they attracted lively and noisy crowds, often due to the alcohol they served. Speaking of drinks, that was a major draw for folks who frequented saloons. You typically find drinks that were made with ingredients as basic as burnt sugar, raw alcohol, and even chewing tobacco. These concoctions were pretty strong, and maybe a bit risky, each with a name that hinted at its taste, or lack thereof. According to Legends of America, some of the drink names included Tarantula Joe, Toss Lightning, Red Eye, Tanglefoot, 40 Rod, and the crowd pleaser, Coffin Varnish, which probably didn't taste much better than it sounds. Saloons were for fun and not shootouts. Life on the American frontier was a real roller coaster ride. Imagine, it could be thrilling one moment and a bit lonesome the next. Picture this. After a grueling day taming the wild land, laying down those endless train tracks, or digging deep into the earth for precious minerals, young folks were itching for a way to kick back and shake off the solitude. Enter the saloon. It was like their happy place. Kind of like how we head for a treat after a long day, they headed straight for a drink. But these saloons were more than just ordinary bars. They were like community centers on steroids. People flocked to them, thirsty not just for whiskey, but for company too. The scene was lively, with settlers, locals, and travelers mingling like old pals. Sure, they might talk shop or have a round of cards, but the main agenda was to socialize. For single men, it was like hitting the jackpot, a chance to find friendship or maybe even more after sweating it out all day. Now you might think Wild West saloons were hotbeds of gunfights and chaos, thanks to what you've seen in movies. But guess what? Reality was more about bottles and board games than bullets. Take Virginia City, Nevada, for instance. Researchers dug up more empty bottles and board game pieces than any evidence of shootouts. So it seems the frontier life had a lot more cheers than fears. New boom towns use them as city centers. Imagine you're starting a brand new town in the untamed American frontier. What's the very first building you want to put up? Well, in those rugged days, it would have to be a saloon. These lively establishments weren't just places to wet your whistle. They were the heart and soul of the frontier. Saloons were like the Swiss Army knives of the Wild West. They did it all. Need some supplies in exchange for your furs? Head to the saloon. Looking for a cozy spot to rest your weary bones? You'd find it in the saloon. Want to have a say in local matters, or simply catch up with your fellow pioneers? The saloon was the place to be. Now here's the kicker. In the Wild West, you could do it all under one roof. You could sip and drink, try your luck at a game of cards, and even cast your vote in the same spot. And if your new settlement was missing a proper church, no worries. The saloon would step in as a makeshift chapel on Sundays, with the bottles and poker chips respectfully taking a break for a sermon. But not everything always went according to plan. In a tiny town called Brighton, Colorado, back in August 1884, a rowdy group of cowboys disrupted a solemn Presbyterian service inside a saloon. They hollered and fired their guns in the air, making quite a ruckus. The saloon keeper had had enough and called it quits shortly after that incident. Think of saloons as the original social media hubs. They were where folks found job opportunities, caught up on the latest news, and traded stories and rumors. These places brought together people from all walks of life as they moved through the ever-expanding American West. So if you were building a frontier town, you definitely want that saloon right at the heart of it all. Saloons were seen as a good investment for a new town. Setting up a saloon back in the day was a breeze. All you needed were a few tables, a sturdy tent, and of course, some good old alcohol. But as towns started popping up like wildflowers, so did the saloons. These saloon folks were smart cookies. They'd put their money where their mugs were, depending on how well their town or camp was doing. You see, saloons in towns near those big noisy railroads had it made. They could keep the good times rolling because they could plow their profits back into the business. As towns grew bigger and busier, something interesting happened to the local saloons. They didn't just sit there. They grew with change, like a chameleon in the wild. Imagine this. These cozy little saloons, which used to be tiny shacks, started to stretch their legs. They upgraded from shabby shanties to sturdy, permanent buildings. And it wasn't just about the walls and roofs. They also got a makeover inside. They weren't satisfied with plain wooden chairs and tables anymore. Nope, they brought in fancy stuff, like comfy couches and shiny lights. It was like going from a simple campfire to a luxurious living room. But wait, there's more. These saloons weren't just places to sip a drink anymore. They decided to throw in some excitement. You could still have your drinks, of course, but now there was something extra: gambling. Yep, they added games like poker and roulette to keep folks entertained. And guess what? This new plan worked like a charm. People started spending more and more time at these saloons, enjoying the swanky surroundings and trying their luck at the tables. Now let me tell you about some towns that really went wild with this saloon craze. Take Fort Worth, Texas, for instance. By the time 1883 rolled around, this bustling town had a whopping 60 saloons. That's like having a saloon on every corner. And then there's Denver, Colorado. Back in 1858, it had a modest 30 saloons. But fast forward to 1890, and you won't believe it, there were a mind-boggling 478 saloons in town. It was like they sprouted up overnight. So, as towns grew, these saloons didn't stay behind. They transformed into these fantastic places where you can relax, have a drink, and try your luck, all in one cozy spot. It was a wild time in the Wild West. No women allowed, unless they were working. Saloons used to be a place where mostly guys hung out, and you'd often find ladies working there as barmaids and entertainers. One of the most famous entertainers was Malda Branscombe, but everyone knew her as Big Minnie. They called her that because she was a big, strong lady, standing at a towering 6 feet and weighing 230 pounds. Big Minnie did lots of different jobs in the famous town of Tombstone, Arizona. Sometimes she was a barmaid, serving drinks to the folks. Other times, she'd put on little shows like acting or dancing. And well, there were times when she worked as a lady of the night too. Now, here's where it gets interesting. One day, there was a guy in the saloon who had a little too much to drink. He got rowdy and even fired a shot into the ceiling. Big Minnie, without hesitating, stepped in and literally threw him out of the place. Yep, she became the bouncer, the one who makes sure everyone behaves. Big Minnie was quite the character in those wild western days. Back in the day, in those old-timey saloons, something interesting used to happen. You see, sometimes the ladies working there would offer some extra services, But when it came to drinks, they had a clever trick up their sleeves. They convinced the fellas to buy fancy, expensive liquor, and guess what? They get a little cut of the action themselves. Now there was this guy named George M. Hamill, who really didn't like what was going on in those saloons. He wrote all about it in a book back in 1908, calling it Passing the Saloon. He said, "I went to Denver once, and let me tell you, those saloons were filled with some not-so-nice ladies. They'd be right there at the bar, drinking with the guys. One of them would come up to you and say, 'How about a drink?' And the barkeeper would chime in, 'Sure, why not get her a drink?' And here's the kicker. It costs at least 25 cents just to buy a lady a drink. Imagine that. You order a 5-cent drink, but because you bought one for her too, suddenly you had a 25-cent bill. And get this, the saloon would keep a shiny dime of that and give her a little check for 15 cents, which she could cash in later. Sometimes, bartenders had a sneaky plan. To keep the ladies from getting too tipsy while still making money from drinks, they'd serve them tea instead of the strong stuff like whiskey. Or they'd give them beer that was kinda watered down. Tricky, right? So, those old saloons weren't just places for drinks. They were full of interesting stories and tricks of the trade. Thanks for watching our video on the role of saloons in Western communities. We hope you found it interesting and informative. Now it's your turn. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Did you learn something new? Or do you have any stories or insights to share about saloons in the Old West? Leave a comment below and let's start a conversation. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on more fascinating content coming your way. Your support means the world to us, and we look forward to bringing you more exciting videos in the future. Thanks again for watching.